Hello, my name is Opal Hope Bennett. I'm the shorts programmer for Doc NYC, and I want to thank you for joining us for the shorts program Roots. We are pleased to have the filmmakers from all of the films in the program here with us to do a Q&A with you. And I'm going to introduce them to you and get into the conversation. We have at the beginning of the program, Motherland, Ellen Evans with us. Hey, Ellen. Crescendo by Alex Mallis. Hey, Alex. 24 by Brian Yulo Ing. Mommy's Nightmare by Jonathan Napolitano. Hey, Jonathan. Hyatt by Rendah. And closing things out with Sing Me a Lullaby by Tiffany Hsiung. So good to see you all. Hi, everybody. So let's go in that order. Please tell us about your film. Let's start with Ellen.
So Motherland is a film which explores the experiences of three men who have been deported to Jamaica by the British government. Two of them are young men who were deported following prison sentences, and the third man actually wasn't technically deported. He went back to Jamaica for the first time to visit and wasn't allowed back into the UK. He had his passport confiscated and he was told he wasn't British by a member of the UK border force, and was essentially stranded in Jamaica for 20 years. So the film was made in the wake of the Windrush scandal, which was a British political scandal in which hundreds of British people who were from the Commonwealth, who had come to the UK as children, were basically being wrongfully detained and deported by the British government. So the film explores one story from the Windrush scandal and then two stories of younger men to kind of explore how the UK's hostile environment policy was affecting the younger generation too.
Thank you. Let's go to Alex.
So my film Crescendo is a story, sort of a portrait of this opera singer, a tenor named Michael Fabiano, and it chronicles his journey and struggle to overcome his own demons, and also come out as gay in the opera world, which although it might seem counterintuitive, is actually historically has been a pretty conservative place. So it's a little bit about his sexual identity, but a lot of it about his own self-doubt that he'd been experiencing. He'd been bullied as a kid and kind of constantly told he was never good enough in anything he tried. And so the film kind of celebrates his journey to stardom.
Thank you, Alex. Let's go to Brian.
24 is an animated retrospective about my life growing up between the Philippines and Singapore. It covers a wide spectrum of political, social, contextual issues like serving in the military, being between different political structures, and it kind of explores every year of my life for 24 years in vignettes and in animation.
Thank you, Brian. Let's go to Jonathan.
Mommy's Nightmare is essentially a portrait of my mother. This was when I was 6, 7 years old, and we kind of revisit her relationship with my father, which was a very toxic relationship at the time. And we kind of go through her struggle and what she had to do to kind of get her situation out of, get herself out of that situation before it got worse.
Let's go to Rendah.
So Hayat is essentially an intimate portrait about a Muslim migrant family, and it chronicles a single mother as she raises her 4 children, living in inner city Melbourne, Australia, in government housing, and just how she navigates her personal ideas of, culture, identity, disconnect, trying to understand the culture that's surrounding her and have that balance between keeping her children in touch, but also making sure that, they're adapting to this world that's very foreign to hers, and depicting all like the subtleties in the African migrant experience essentially.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tiffany.
Hi, our film Sing Me a Lullaby is it's a personal story, an intertwined journey of mothers and daughters told through my journey, my personal journey in trying to find my mother's biological parents 14 years ago. And the story is captured over the course of 14 years across 2 continents. And really it's a film about healing inherited pain, uncovering familial history, but ultimately recognizing that love comes in many forms. And at the end of the day, it's really a way to preserve the legacy of the many women that have come before me and their sacrifices for really me and the next generation, and honors their choices and their journeys as well. Yeah, that's Sing Me Lullaby.
Thank you so much, all of you. So this program is looking at stories around identity and home, and the places and experiences that make us who we are. We have a sort of nice dividing here between the stories that have some personal genesis, either about your own story or those close to you parents, with you, Jonathan and Tiffany. So I'm gonna ask you guys this question in 2 groups, and when you are looking at stories where you're having to address things that really go to the heart of a person's, identity and like their undergirding, right? Their homeland, that which is what makes them who they are. I'm curious, when you're dealing with it as someone who's closely to the subject, how that informed your storytelling versus when it's someone whose story you're having to depict, if that makes sense. I'm going to start with you, Jonathan, and go through the folks who are personally connected, and then go to the other grouping of films.
Yeah, honestly, to tell you the truth, my mom was, growing up, she was always kind of secretive in some way. I remember a lot of what happened back then, but it was something that we kind of just didn't talk about as years passed. My mom got remarried. She had another kid, my youngest brother. It wasn't until recently when I started digitizing some old tapes where I realized, interesting, she sounds happy on tape, but I know what she was going through during that time. And so when I approached my mother about making this film, I honestly did not know what was going to come with that. When we sat down for the interview, which lasted about 3 hours, that was probably the most emotional day I ever had with my mother. And that was also the most eye-opening experience I ever had with her as well. That's when I really understood who she was and where she came from, and not just where she came from, but how she felt about coming from where she came from. So making this film, honestly, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to even have a mother, so I'm not going to complain. But it's pretty amazing that it took 34 years to really understand, to really crack that shell of who my mother is. She's always loved me and everything like that, and I've always loved her. But love is one thing. To really, truly know where someone is coming from and who they really are is another thing. So honestly, it was a very emotional journey. And when I was putting the story together, it was just, my mom's story, as meaningful as it is to me, it's unfortunately not a unique story. Everyone has their own version of it. So it was just a way for me to tell her story, but at the same time applying it to other people so they can relate and understand that, oh, well, yeah, I was in this situation myself, or I'm in this situation now. And so having my mother kind of be the cheerleader in a way for my film was kind of like in its own place in itself. And so, yeah, this film hit us emotionally on many stages. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to you, Tiffany, because I imagine there's some parallels there. And
everything that Jonathan was saying, I was like, you too, right, Jonathan? You know how it's like. And I'm not sure if you went through this type of like kind of, I don't know, rabbit hole / Truman Show-esque, where I think the challenge of making such a personal film where you inevitably are one of the subjects as well, and your family and everything is so intertwined, where normally when we have, I guess, difficult conversations or things that are challenging to look at within our own family, often, you know, the safe way is to walk away or avoid it. But as the director, we almost have to peel back even more layers and forced to kind of really look at it through a magnifying glass, which for me, the process, like Jonathan says, like, I'm just also fortunate that I got to have this type of experience with my mom. I don't think, especially, you know, East Asian culture where you can have that type of relationship and have those candid conversations. I mean, I was fortunate to use the camera as that tool to do that. And I think that these are probably things I've always wanted to talk to my mom about, but sometimes we need an excuse to motivate ourselves to have those conversations versus out of the blue just sitting down and having a cup of joe and having that conversation. There was a sense of like a purpose, like I need to ask these questions, and this is how we're gonna go from there. And but I think the most challenging part of it is, and this is probably why it took me a total of 15 years to finally make this film, was realizing I couldn't avoid looking at the footage and that I would have to understand and see my true self as well. I think there were, I'm not sure if you did this, Jonathan, if you had like video journals of yourself throughout the years documented, but I had video journals of myself, and I remember coming across this footage of myself talking to future Tiffany, and it was very trippy. And she was like, Tiffany, if things ever get challenging, I want you to watch this video, and I want you to know that as long as your intentions are pure and that, you know, your heart is in the right place, don't give up, even though it's hard. And so it was weird that like young 28-year-old Tiffany had the foresight that I would get into that cycle of avoiding things. And subsequently I realized how much I'm like my mother. And so there's this like, you know, avoid and not wanting to bring it up, not wanting to talk about it, and believing that I had done something wrong for many, many years. And coming across that footage was very helpful. Also, you know, making the apology my first feature doc was very helpful to, you know, film stories of other women and other grandmothers and understanding their truth and understanding the dynamics of other people's secrets and why and how they shape and inform, you know, one's family and how that informs the next generation. And being able to have that privilege to see over the years of how that affects others made me understand how that was going to affect me and my relationship with my mother. And so I needed to start one film in order to make another film, and I needed to finish that film in order to come back and understand the importance of finishing Sing Me a Lullaby. And I think the greatest reward for me since releasing the film is to, you know, share this movie with my mom's friends and family, and for my mom to finally be seen in her whole entirety. And yeah, that's the greatest reward.
Thank you, Tiffany. A lot of parallel experience with you and Jonathan. Brian, we're gonna come to you now since it's your own experiences that you're excavating in 24.
Yeah, hi. So the initial catalyst that made me kind of make 24 was about a year ago. My uncle was assassinated in the Philippines in February on Epifano de los Santos Avenue, which is a highway in the Philippines. And I was working on another project back then, but it kind of made me focus very much on trying to understand, like, who am I and why did I come to be in America making films, talking about different subjects. And so I kind of examined my own personal history, because I grew up, I'm half Filipino and half Singaporean. So I grew up between both cultures. And I've kind of experienced a lot of different, like, very specific experiences, because it's kind of like living between both the first world and a third world country and not really being a part of either one. So I wanted to kind of examine aspects of what does it mean to grow up in this very specific environment where there are, political assassinations, where there are people who rip out their eyes with hooks on the streets to beg for money. And what does it mean to kind of navigate the experiences, like growing up constantly trying to understand your own identity while you're being challenged by the world around you. And so I made the film 24 to be kind of like this understanding of the most significant moments of my life and how I kind of responded to it, and examining that through animation, because I didn't really have any footage from that time. So I wanted to be able to represent each in such a way that I could depict a year, like what is life leading up to so far, and how can I represent that in a way that other people can understand it. Yeah.
And how did you distill 24 distinct moments?
Some of them were very easy, because I guess like a lot of the very significant moments in my life were very impactful and very vivid. But beyond that, it was trying to understand from both like a cultural and social space, what does it mean to constantly be trying to understand where you are at every point. Generally, I don't look at my past, because there are a lot of things in my own personal history that I generally try to avoid. So it was probably the first time I ever had to take a look back and understand who I am as a person. What does that mean to kind of like navigate these experiences?
Well, thank you for doing that work. It yielded a beautiful film. And now I'm going to go to Alex, Renah, and Ellen. So you were focusing on subjects, talking about fundamentals in their life. Alex, your characters coming to terms with his identity and coming out. Rendah, your characters negotiating a new space, and Ellen, your characters having to try to fight for their statehood. Talk about distilling those really fundamental issues into the story that you depicted. Start with Ellen.
I keep doing that. I had a feeling you were going to start with me. Okay, so how do I start? I think we're the film's quite interesting because it's really about the experiences of these people and trying to convey, at sometimes poetically, how it actually feels to be in their situation, which is that they are living in a place which no longer feels like home, right? Like the state that they had lived in for decades has basically decided that they belong there, but it doesn't, Jamaica no longer feels like home for them. They left when they were very young children. They're going back there. They don't have any friends or family there. It's a completely bewildering experience. So the film is really trying to convey that. And the only way we could do that really was to privilege their voices. The film is sort of strangely devoid of, there aren't many facts in it, right? There aren't any experts. It's totally these men telling you how they feel and how it feels to be in this totally alienating position. And then everything else works in service of that, really. With the visuals, people have picked up on how it's not a picture postcard depiction of Jamaica. It's a lot of the figures are kind of isolated and solitary. It's still stunningly beautiful, but it's we're just trying to get across how it feels to be in that position. And of course, you know, the historical context. We couldn't make a film about immigration and UK immigration law without bringing in the historical context. So, you know, the film opens with shots of the former plantation house and Ken very eloquently talking about, you know, the colonial relationship with Britain and how Britain completely abused that. Does that answer the question? Do you have any more? Opal, it's your
I'm
turn.
muted. I said very well, it says. Let's go to Alex.
I think making this film for me was interesting because we set out just to. The original intent of the film was just actually like, oh, there's this wedding happening at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City, and it's the first wedding that's ever been there, and it's a same-sex wedding, and it felt historic because of this lesser known context of opera that we kind of tap into a little bit, that even though theater is, you know, for better or for worse, understood to be a sort of like expressive and accepting place, classical opera was not. Not so, you know, I think a lot of the audiences are very conservative, rich, white, conservative kind of vibes throughout opera. And so as I got to know him and started to learn more about the significance of this wedding and his own experience, it felt, you know, it was fascinating and very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, the challenge was not centering too much his coming out. I think a lot of people in the queer community, especially in film, have like spoken critically of that narrative, because coming out is not a singular event that happens once and then you're just free of the shackles of what, you know, the challenges that come with that. So we really wanted to make sure, and this was something that I talked about with Michael a lot, was like, you know, yeah, he came out and that was a big moment for him, but it wasn't just that. You know, his struggle is really about his internal struggle of just like not feeling confident, and some of that was related to bullying, some of that was related to homophobia, some of that was related to the pressures of the industry and success. And so, yeah, you know, distilling it down, it's a great responsibility, and it's something that, you know, of course, we're very intentional about, and you know, as I mentioned, wanted to be careful to balance out the parts of his life that felt most important. And I think because of the way he spoke about coming out to his grandfather, and because it moved him, became so emotional, it did feel important to include, and yeah, you know, so it was a balance. But I think he's thrilled with the piece, and he's thrilled with this festival and everything about it. So, you know, he's an interesting guy because he's a superstar. You know, before this film, I knew some opera, but in working on it, became much more familiar with the industry, and became quite impressed with him and his rise from, you know, a kind of nerdy nobody kid that would get bullied into somebody who travels the world and is on the world's greatest opera stages nightly, knocking audiences off their feet.
Yeah, and standing up is quite the example. I loved his arc in the film, where you could tell there was such anxiety around this too. It was like something that he was quite nonchalant about. That was beautiful to behold.
Yeah, I think hats off to our editor Lily Henderson, who really identified the parallels there that may have not been immediately obvious to me. When we came back with all the footage, she saw this connection between his past and his, like I said, some of the struggles that he felt, as just feeling like an empowered individual, in the way that paralleled with his own journey to be embraced in all ways, including sexuality, in the opera world. So she was an amazing person to have on board.
Gotta love your editor and documentary. All right, so we're gonna give the last word to Rendah to speak with us about your subject, and being able to convey her experience in trying to forge a new home for herself and her kids. and negotiate the new space, the new culture.
Yeah. Well, I think like this story was actually very personal to me, and it came from just uh, feeling like the African migrant experience was kind of incomplete in the way it was understood and in the way that it is traditionally depicted on just mainstream media and just what you feel like you would know looking from the outside in. And I'm second generation Australian. Like I was born in Australia. My parents were migrants as well from Egypt and Eritrea. So in Rahma, and I knew her for about 6 years when she first moved to Australia, my family were neighbors with her. So I kind of watched the kids grow up, and Sarah, who's the youngest, was born here. And I kind of, yeah, watched them grow up, and I really could identify this really strong strength in her that I saw in my mother. And that's something that actually really drew me to her story even more, and trying to understand kind of, rather than where she came from, how she was trying to navigate the space that she found herself now. And with the film, I mean, it's, you know, a slice of life, and it really does delve into the present, and it doesn't really touch on the past, because I feel like what's important is how she kind of connects with her society now, and how she yeah, upholds that strength, especially as a single mother. My mother is also single, and Hayat, who's the eldest daughter, I identified with her a lot as well, just growing up. She went to the same high school I went to, lived in kind of similar, very predominantly white neighborhoods like me. And I kind of understood a lot of the difficulties that she might face, just trying to be young and just be herself. But then also kind of, there's a lot of ways that her mom and herself mirror each other in the film, and that's something I wanted to bring across. So it was definitely a very personal story, and kind of just seeing the way that Rahma, you know, is able to just be an amazing role model, and a very strong person as well, which is, I think, a lot of people, a lot of mothers and families can really identify with, no matter where their background is.
Yeah, I like that you say it's a slice of life. I thought your lens was incredibly intimate in this film, and it doesn't surprise me that you have a personal relationship with these subjects. There were so many sequences where you just feel like you're kind of dropped into the room with the kids, and your camera is very much unnoticed, but doing beautiful work. So
yeah, and that's kudos to my DOP as well, Gabriel Francis. He was like, we worked very closely together. And as much as, you know, yes, it could have been more intimate if it was me being the one behind the camera, but I feel like he was kind of introduced very early on and developed a relationship, especially with the kids. So it was almost like he was invisible while we were filming. So that was great.
It's beautiful work. I got the 5-minute warning 10 minutes ago, so we're a little bit over, but I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. Thank you all for your beautiful work. I really impressed with this grouping of films, so really glad to have you with us in the festival. And thank you to the audience for checking out Roots and for staying after to chat with the filmmakers. Let's all say goodbye now.